She couldn't be sure. It certainly wasn't impossible that another had been given the precious gift to which she had clung so tightly for the last 300 years. But if she did share it with another, she would likely never know. Her isolation had become almost absolute. The age of transmission had transformed her existence from that of a private villager, having few social connections other than in passing and commercial exchanges, to one of complete withdrawal. There were no neighbors to speak of, and any mail or necessary supplies were delivered to the receiving station she had built for herself, just over a half-mile from the cabin. The woman picked up the large stone container and swirled the liquid into a clockwise vortex, careful not to lose any of it over the top, though caution was mostly unnecessary, since what remained of the potable would have fit easily into a jigger. This sip was different, however, and her careful attention was not without cause. This swig was the last of her batch. It was the final priceless ounce. She knew in her core it wasn't really enough for full revitalization. It would replenish for another year if she limited her energy, even 2 if she did nothing but sleep. After that, she would decline quickly. And since the elixir didn't spare her from the necessary provisions of all human beings, food, heat, and so on, languidness and hibernation were no more a possibility for her than they were for the woman she was in her old life. In fact, she would need to exert more energy than most people, since she was not surrounded by the accommodations of a modern world. She would need to farm and gather, and even hunt if the harvest didn't last through winter, as well as keep an ample supply of kindling and wood. And she wasn't the youngest maiden in the court when she began the regimen. Certainly past 60 years, as she recalled. So though the potion sustained her and kept her strong, what was done was done. The contaminations of time did not reverse. The woman raised the stone cup, which was little more than a small bowl, careful not to breathe the rancid aroma. As it reached her lips, the woman hesitated. This was it, she thought. This last drink would drain her supply, leaving her cabin empty of the fluid she'd come to worship over the many decades. She willed a pragmatic moment into her addicted mind. Maybe she could hold out for a few months longer. Just a few, until she identified the source of her next supply. There really wasn't the urgency to drink today. She still felt strong and capable. Why, just this morning she had restocked the woodpile after several hours of brisk chopping. And besides, it had only been 14 months since her last dose. Certainly she had gone without for much longer. All of that was true. But the reality was that the effects had diminished over the years, and she needed larger doses now than in the past. As it was, her last drink had been meager, having been divided in half to leave today's swallow. No, she needed it today, all of it, and if it was enough to sustain her until the end of summer, she would be lucky. The woman figured by June she would need to be blending. She pinched her nose and drank slowly, relaxing the pharyngeal nerve at the back of her throat to prevent gagging. The sickening warmth lingered on her soft palate and then descended the length of her windpipe. The woman could feel the pulp of her victim's organs catch and then release in her esophagus. And she lamented that, although she'd always spent days pestling, she had never been able to thin out the concoction completely. This part had always been the hardest. In the early days, often inducing violent spasms of choking and expectoration. What she had coughed up over the years. The amount could have sustained her for another generation. But those reactions had subsided long ago. Aside from the taste, she had mostly gotten used to the process.